Today, we're diving into the incredible story of one man's journey to make his voice and the voice of his entire people heard in the very heart of the British Empire. This is the story of Parmenas Mukiri.
You know, this quote from the book's foreword really says it all. You have to remember, back in 1933, hearing directly from a Kenyan African, in his own words, completely unedited, that was absolutely revolutionary. This wasn't a story about an African man. This was an African man speaking for himself, totally unfiltered.
And it all kicks off with this single telegram. Imagine that. You're Parmenas Mukiri, a teacher in Kenya, and suddenly you're pulled right out of your classroom and thrown into the middle of a global political fight. You're about to go on a mission that will take you across continents and pretty much challenge everything you know.
Now, Mukiri's journey didn't just happen out of the blue. You can see on this timeline that it was really the boiling point of decades of tension. I mean, from the moment British corporate rule began in 1888 through the violent crackdowns on activists in the 20s, the pressure cooker in Kenya was just building and building. His summons in 1931, that's a direct result of this long simmering struggle.
So, let's meet the man at the center of this storm and really try to understand the call to action that set him on this incredible path.
What makes this whole thing so powerful is that it's his story, right from the source. It's this incredibly rare personal look into the mind of an educated Kenyan man who has to figure out how to navigate a world built on colonial power and these rigid racial lines.
To really get the man, you have to get the world he came from. A world that, way before any Europeans showed up, had its own really sophisticated systems of democracy and government. And right at the heart of this was a concept called ituika. Now, this wasn't chaos or some violent overthrow. It was a structured, democratic handover of power. Think about it. It's like a built-in, peaceful revolution every single generation, specifically designed to stop any one group from holding on to power for too long. It was a system literally built for renewal. And this chart just brilliantly shows the clash of two completely different worlds. On one side, you've got the Kikuyu system, democratic, always changing, and totally against the idea of a permanent king or ruler. And on the other side, the British system of just appointing chiefs who were loyal to the colonial government, not always to their own people. For Mokwe, this wasn't progress. It was watching a deep-rooted democracy get torn down.
All right, so let's get to his actual journey, because it's on the trip to London that these abstract ideas about empire become painfully, personally real.
I mean, you can just feel the raw humiliation in his words, can't you? He's on a train, in his own country, he pays the same exact fare, but he's treated as something less than human. He gets served last, with cold soup, literally the leftovers. It's such a small moment, but it's this powerful, gut-punch example of the daily degradation under colonial rule.
But then, something changes. He gets to Denmark, and he faces the same kind of prejudice, but this time, the local manager stands up for him. And this was a huge moment for Mukiri. He realized that racism wasn't some universal law of nature. It was a choice. And he was starting to see that some people, well, they chose differently. And here's the thing about Mukiri. He wasn't just experiencing all this. He was a really sharp analyst of what was happening. He completely nails the root of the problem. A child isn't born with prejudice. It's taught. It's woven into something as innocent as a nursery rhyme. He understood that these little lessons early on create biases that are just incredibly hard to unlearn later in life.
So, Mukiri finally arrives in London, the center of the empire, carrying all the hopes of his people, only to be met with a door slammed right in his face.
Just try to imagine it. You travel thousands of miles for this one single purpose, to speak to a parliamentary committee. And the minute you get there, they tell you, "Oh, sorry, we're done listening." The official channels were just shut. The entire reason for his journey was gone. He had been officially, institutionally silenced. So, this is the big question, isn't it? What do you do? What do you do when the system that's supposed to hear you out completely refuses to listen? Do you just pack up and go home?
No, you don't go home. Mukiri and his colleague, they pivot, they adapt. If the front door is closed, you find a side door. So, they submit their testimony in writing to create a permanent record. They organize their own meeting inside a room in the House of Commons. They take their case directly to influential groups who might listen. This isn't defeat, this is brilliant strategic resistance.
And all of this leads to the final act of Mukiri's mission. Because when he was blocked from speaking in person, he found a much more permanent and honestly, a much more powerful way to deliver his testimony.
Just let this number sink in for a second. 200 to 1. For every single white settler, there were 200 native Africans. And yet, that massive minority had zero direct representation in the government that was ruling their lives. This one statistic tells you everything you need to know about the staggering imbalance of power he was fighting.
And at the absolute core of the problem was one simple, broken thing: trust. Mukiri explains that the actions of the colonial government had just completely shattered any faith the African people had in their promises. This wasn't just some political disagreement, it was a deep, profound sense of betrayal.
And this slide lays out that betrayal in black and white. In 1930, you get the promise. A law is passed, the Native Lands Trust Ordinance, formally guaranteeing African land rights. Then, just 2 years later, the reality. Gold is discovered on that same land. So what happens to the promise? Well, the government simply amends its own law, deletes the protective parts, and takes the land. A promise written into law, just erased for profit.
And this brings us to his final answer. Silenced by Parliament, betrayed by the law, Parmenas Mukiri picked up a pen. He wrote a book. He decided his testimony wouldn't be a speech that just disappears into thin air, but a permanent, unchangeable record for the entire world to read. He found a way to speak, not just to a committee, but to history itself.
Mukiri's journey took place almost a century ago, but it leaves us with a question that feels more relevant right now than ever. Who, today, is being silenced? Whose stories and perspectives are we still missing? And if those voices finally found a platform, the way Mukiri built one for himself, what essential truths about our world might we finally learn?